Subject vehicles, a 2015 Victory Vision Tour. After about 50,000 miles and several years out on the highway, we've had a couple of parts that decided they wanted to break, namely at the mounts of the body panels. This one here was the result of over-tightening when I put the panel back on the bike. The other one was just road vibration after having been hammered for so long. One of the fixes that I did try earlier was on this piece here, where I took super glue and baking soda, of all things, and I actually tried to mix the two together. It does form a rock solid bond, however, it forms a very brittle bond, and as we can see, it did not last. What I'll be doing through this series of videos, I'm going to use JB Weld plastic weld, and we'll find out how well it works. One of the first things I'm going to need to do, though, however, is clean all of that residue off of these two pieces here in order to get them to work. I started cleaning this already using my Dremel rotary tool with a grinding attachment. I'm changing that to a standard drill and a rotary file and grinding stone, primarily because when you take the Dremel and its high speed and you mix it with that super glue compound mixture, it'll smoke. And that smoke can cause chemical burns in your lungs, your eyes, so that's why I'm changing up to something different. You don't need high RPMs to get the stuff to break away, you just need to get it out so you can clean it up and get a good bond with the new materials. Get it all drilled out about as best as I think I can. Went in with rubbing alcohol, 91%, to clean off the surface without leaving any residue. I stayed away from using a electrical compound cleaner or other aerosols, largely because I didn't know what kind of reaction I was going to have with the plastics or not, and I knew that the rubbing alcohol would do the same job, not leave any residue, and not dissolve the plastic. Next step is I'm going to mix the resin for the JB Weld plastic weld, and I'm going to attach the broken piece back onto that leg fairing. Don't need to use much, and I don't want to waste it. I don't have much time once I start to mix this because sets in 5 minutes. So I'm going to turn off the camera so I can use both hands and get this done. All right, there's the back side of the fix. The epoxy is exactly what it says so on the label. It is a quick setting epoxy. It is not a grabbing adhesive. So when you go to attach a part to another piece, you're going to need to hold whatever those two parts are together for the entire setting time. It is not like a super glue where you can just get each side a little dab, wait a little bit, and then touch it and it holds itself. You've got to wait the entire time. Now that part is back together, I'm going to let that sit a little bit longer because even on the first side that I had used the weld on, it's still a little tacky, a little rubbery. The next piece that I need to attach this is the broken one, and that's going to be the patch. I drilled holes through this piece of rubberized plastic to give the epoxy something a little bit more to bite through instead of having be a flat piece of plastic against a flat piece of plastic. Now you could end up having some of that epoxy sticking to the part, going through each one of these holes, and more or less grabbing and holding onto this all at the same time. Next up is going to be cleaning this piece by piece and putting it together. Keeping in mind some of those lessons learned from that first piece of gluing it together, that you have to hold it in place for it to set. This piece was no different. Used a laminate. You're trying to get an angle of light so you can kind of see what there's the piece that we started off with at the beginning of the video, and we essentially just laid it flat and ran a good solid bead of the epoxy around the piece that we put on. After about an hour, it finally started setting itself up, and it's getting hard enough to work with now. The next step that we're going to go to is I'm going to start using the putty, and I'm going to use that to sculpt a fix somewhere else on the same body panel. Next up, I'm going to use this plastic weld stick. I've used a similar product from this by JB Weld before. It was their classic formulation. Now what it is you've got a putty stick with both materials, the hardener and the compound itself. It's in putty, it's pliable. You cut off the chunk that you need, mix it by hand, and you apply it after it cures. You can sand, paint, tap, whatever it is that you've got to do to shape it to be the repair that you need it to be. You can use gloves, you can not use gloves, it's up to you. I haven't had a problem or nor a preference when working with the putty. When it comes to the epoxy mix that we used earlier in the video, I highly suggest that you wear some kind of a glove because I spent much time scrubbing my hands to get the crap off of me. So I'm going to get off the video for a second, mix this up, and I'm going to start shaping my repair. After having let those parts cure, I ran it on the bike for about a week. Out of the two products, the liquid variant of plastic weld did not hold up as well as I had hoped. The putty version seems to be much more resilient to vibration, so keep that in mind when you're choosing your products to use. This piece was completely molded out of the putty. I shaped it, filed it, sanded it down to make it match the other side. This here was a mix of the putty at first on this side, and over here where there's fresh putty applied, I had liquid. The liquid side broke, which is why I've got new and fresh putty sitting on top of it, letting it dry. I'll be sanding that down and painting that later. The other portions of this repair that were strictly liquid was that one here. It did not hold. This is now broken again. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get putty inside of that to make that hold because the putty seems to be working best if you can overlap it or stuff it into a crack. On to the last point that was done was this repair here, which is still holding. And I believe the reason why it's holding was because of that base plate that I had put in there earlier and just gobbed it over with the epoxy itself. After that had cured and it sat in the sun after having driven it around for a week, on this side, we ended up getting a bit of a crack on that corner. So I used the putty to fill in the crack, sanded it down, and I'm going to be painting over top of that here soon. So keep that in mind when you're going to choose your product, that although the liquid seems to be easy to mix and simple to apply and advertises a higher strength rating, it does not do well with vibrations at all. It ends up being very brittle and it'll break itself away and you're going to end up with another busted part. The putty seems to be able to get worked into the smaller points. It has a lower tensile strength, but it seems to be a much more resilient repair when you're going to be working on something automotive-wise. It's going to be subject to vibration. And even though I didn't have the greatest of luck with this as the liquid product, one of the tools that helped when I was using it to get to where I wanted it to go was that attachment. It's got a bunch of little baffles inside of it that mixes the product as you press the plunger. The thing you need to keep in mind is that once it's inside of that nose, you're going to lose that nose, so be careful with it. Once you end up using your product, all of that inside of here is mixed. It'll start curing. If you think you're going to be able to pull the plungers back up and suck everything back into the tube in order to clean out that nozzle, you got to keep in mind that all the product that's in this tip is now mixed. If you pull it back up inside of your main container, you now have contaminated your remaining ingredients. It will cure, harden, and ruin your supply.